All right, now we're recording. So that's good. So one of the reasons why I record these is because I put them up on our YouTube channel. And the only reason we have that is so that you don't have to go scrolling through Facebook to go find our videos to rewatch them from the events that we do. So we put them all in just one place. And so this one will be recorded. We'll put it up. I'll put it up later tonight, early tomorrow before I go into the office. But yeah, welcome you guys. Happy Thursday night. Thanks for tuning in. And we look forward, Bob and I look forward to talking about the tip on just understanding what house hacking looks like. But before we do, let's get past some announcements, things like that. So first of all, so Northshore REIA, my goal with it is that it is a place for you guys to grow and learn and get closer to your goals. Kind of an idea that, rising tide lifts all boats type thing. So if there's ever a topic that you want to learn about, if there is ever something that is complex that you're trying to understand, just anything along those lines, if I can't point you to resources, I know a lot of times I can find speakers on it that are not trying to sell you something. You know, this is not going to end in a buy this course for $900. That's not the goal in these events. It's to help educate. So before COVID, we were doing 1 to 3 events a month. So we had the main meeting, which was usually in Covington, Louisiana, at a hotel. And then that was education and networking. And then we had a once a month lunch that was Real Estate Investing 101. That was inside L, side room of a restaurant during lunch on a weekday. And it went over the basics. That I want to kind of share for the first time tonight. That one may get some reshifting post-COVID era. I have some things that I'm looking at doing to kind of reshift that, what I was calling REI 101, because I know that some of these topics we talk about, there's some elementary stuff that a lot of people have questions about. Hey, I need to build a good foundation for understanding real estate investing. And that lunch has been that. But I'm trying to find a way to make it more effective. So stay tuned for that. And then the other one would always be like maybe a networking event in Tangipahoa Parish or something along those lines. Maybe a extra speaker came in or whatever. Sometimes it was just those 2 meetings. Sometimes it'd be a third one. So right now we're dealing mostly with these webinars because, that's what COVID has forced us to do, right? Is to go online and go virtual, which, hey, don't get me wrong, I've enjoyed it. I've been able to bring in more speakers because of it. So one of the things I want to say is, so the next 2 events we have coming up, one of them is a webinar. So that's July 7th. So that's next Tuesday night. Mitzi Diane, many people know about her. She lives in Texas. She's a friend of mine, and this woman is a rock star. If any of you guys know what wholesaling is, she has to date made the largest wholesale fee I've ever heard of, which is a $400,000 wholesale fee whenever she wholesaled an apartment complex. She's an apartment complex owner. She also flips them, wholesales developments, and wholesales $20,000 houses. She's everything in between. She's got an amazing team out in Texas. So I invited her to come speak. And so she's going to talk on finding your flow, a lot of the mindset stuff. As entrepreneurs, as investors, a lot of times we get in our own way, and a lot of times we get very clouded. I know multiple people who are struggling mentally through COVID. So I'm looking forward to have Mitzi come and talk. And then we've got, so that's July 7th. If you look down at the bottom in the chat section, you can see the link for that. The next one is July 14th. Y'all, this is going to be our first in-person meeting. Now, I want to preface this and say that we are going to be being very COVID conscious in our in-person meeting. So July 14th, that's a Tuesday night. We're going to be in Covington, Louisiana at the We Stay Suites. You can see the link again in the chat section. You'll see the link for that. That'll be our normal event. We are going to have a COVID station for sanitation. We're going to clean down the room along with the hotel. and you can wear a mask if you want to, unless it's something that changes between now and then as far as mandating it, because that's not the case so far in St. Tammany Parish. So we're doing everything we can to be compliant and to be mindful. We're going to, you know, encourage a little bit of, you know, maybe the seats won't be right on top of each other. We'll see. We're going to build stuff into that. Here's the deal. If you're uncomfortable of thinking of coming to a meeting like that, it will be recorded, just like these events are, and you can watch there. But here's what the topic's going to be. Back in March, when everything was happening with COVID, I brought on a handful of people from our local real estate industry. I'm talking a lender, a CPA, title company, broker, property manager, contractor, you know, you name it, flipper, wholesaler, landlord, all of the above. And I brought them in and I said, hey, I want to get your feel on what are you seeing in your industry, and what are you doing to kind of pivot, all this stuff. We got great feedback from that. So that is what we're going to replicate. So we're going to have a bit of a panel. I'm going to bring people from all across the industry, so that you're not just listening from all flippers or all realtors or you name it. So I want to give kind of a varied look into it. So that's July 14th. Pay attention to that. Down in the chat section, that's where you can find the link to it. So that is going to be exciting. We're going to ease back in and ease back into these in-person meetings. Again, they're going to be COVID conscious though. So ultimately, you guys, before Bob and I get started, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. There's a few things I wanted to bring up for those of you who listen to Paul and I's show on WWL on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 1, the home improvement show where I talk about real estate problems and Paul talks about, you know, home improvement topics. It's a call-in show. Just FYI, because of the 4th of July, we don't have our show this weekend. So just FYI, in case you're someone who tunes in. And the other thing is that these events, they're all free thanks to some of our local sponsors. I'm going to put down in the chat section, these are people who that I frequently refer people to. So if you're looking for a CPA, if you're looking for a title company, if you're looking for, you know, property management company, contractor, you name it, take a look here. My goal was to find people who I was proud to associate with, and for people who that are investor friendly. So without further ado, I want to bring on Bob Norton. He's actually one of those sponsors. He's a real estate specific CPA. But Bob, how long have you had your brokerage license?
It actually went in effect the day after Katrina hit. So that's since 2005. So that's what, been 15 years at this point? 15
years. So Bob is not only a real estate broker, but he is also a real estate investor, and he is a real estate specific CPA. Bob and I often talk shop. And so I called him up one day and I said, hey, house hacking is something that is very popular, in the sense that it's a popular term. Everyone talks about house hacking. And so I said, let's dive a little bit into that. And so he can bring a great perspective from the tax advantage side. And I'm going to kind of bring just a small different twist to it as far as my creative side. And we'll kind of go from there. So I want to first start off with this, is that I want to kind of introduce, so for those of you guys who don't know who I am, my name's Courtney Fricke. I run Northshore REIA, and I'm an investor. I do everything from wholesale, flip. I have properties that I am a landlord with. Hey, yesterday was the other day when it was, well, yesterday was the first. That's always nice, right? And so I've done a little bit of everything. I'm in the middle of a development project. I've flipped land. I haven't done new construction yet, other than the development part. Done a little bit of everything. And so here is the idea behind what I want to kind of start off with on house hacking is, why would anyone, so let me start this. What is a house hack? The house hack is the idea of taking the house where you live. And have you ever heard of like a life hack or a business hack or, internet hack or whatever? It's a way for you to kind of beat the system. And so many people think of a house hack as buying a duplex and you live in one side and the other person pays your mortgage for you. That is certainly an option, but that is not the only option. I'm living in a single family house right now, and I consider myself as someone who's house hacking. We'll jump into that in a little bit, but understand that it's not just black and white of you buying a multifamily, living in it, and renting it out. Okay? So there is a level of, it begs the question of why would someone want to house hack? Why do you need to beat the system with the house that you live in? I'm glad you asked. And speaking of asking, if you guys have any questions, down at the bottom of your screen, if you click on that chat section, throughout this, if you want to put your questions in there, Bob and I are going to tackle your questions at the tail end. So put your questions on there and we'd love to address them in any way that we can help. So why would someone house hack? Here's the biggest reason why I do it is our biggest expenses are where we live. Think about rent, think about a mortgage. Just in general, most people's biggest expense in life, biggest purchase is a house. Biggest expense is that mortgage payment that comes out every month. So as someone who is looking to build wealth, I want to find ways, advantageous ways to relieve that burden, whether it's partially relieve it or relieve it 100%, okay? Whether that is having someone rent who takes some of the burden, or whether that is, the idea of cash flow or pockets of money coming in from time to time. There's different ways you can do it. So in my mind, when I think about money, I think, okay, if I own something and if it is costing me money, like for example, I just had to get a new computer. That's a liability in the sense that it cost me money to get it. No, yes, it helps me with work and all that stuff. So, quote unquote, I'm making money with it, but my computer does not equal a paycheck. But for example, if I bought a candy machine, like one of those little old school one with the coin in it and you turn it and, if I bought that, filled it up with some candy, it would then be considered an asset because it is making money, right? Most people see their house as an investment. Now, Bob, we can jump in a second because I'll be done in just a few. But the idea of an investment, the house you live in being an investment, people always say, this is the biggest investment you'll ever make. You want to make sure you're making a safe investment with the house that you pick, all these things. But a lot of times when you think about it, most people are buying something where they're not really going to make money on it. They just are buying it because they like what they see. They like the shiplap, they like the color, they like the layout, they like the size, you name it, the location, you name it. So this is going to be an idea where we're going to introduce some savvy ways to handle the house that you live in. And kind of just, we're gonna go across a few different scenarios, but also give some strategic ways. So look, this is also great from first-time investors. This is a great way to get your introduction to being a landlord. This is, like great on-the-job, hands-on training. It's a great way to keep your eye on your investment property because you're, right there involved. Great way to save money. Ultimately here, there's also great ways to lessen your tax burden. There's also great ways to get fantastic and borrower-friendly financing. So those are all some of the benefits of it. So you've got saving money, you can keep a close eye on your investment. You can be it's an introduction being a landlord. You can get borrower-friendly financing. And ultimately, you've got to ask yourself, what is your end game? What are you trying to accomplish with it? Every person's going to have a different place with it. For example, the idea of living in one side of a duplex and renting out the other may not be attractive to the mom and dad who have 5 kids, but it might be attractive to the young guy getting started, okay, who doesn't have the family that maybe he's trying to put in a house in a neighborhood in a certain school district. So without further ado, Bob, I want to bring you on, and I want to introduce Bob Norton and have him start to share what he'd like to share about this.
Okay, great. Thanks, Courtney. So house hacking, as Courtney mentioned, different meanings depending on what the person's talking about in the strategy. The basic one that I think about, of course, is you buy a personal residence and you rent out some of the rooms to roommates, where they're basically paying you rent to live there. You know, if you think about it, in college, a lot of kids will go in together and rent a place. Well, this is a case where you buy the place and you bring in your friends as roommates, and they're making rent payments, but they're actually making your mortgage payment, or it's cutting down on how much they're sharing more of the mortgage payment than you're having to make.
Bob, to make a quick joke, if you guys have seen, there's a meme going around that's really funny, that's been going around on the internet the last few days, where it says, I've been living with my girlfriend for the last few years. We've been paying rent. I just found out the other day she was the owner. You know, so ha ha ha. But so it was a joke going around, but it's the similar idea. Maybe don't do it to the degree that you are charging your boyfriend rent. But hey, I don't know. Hustle, I guess.
Right. And along those lines, I have a client who whose kids were going to school at LSU, and she bought a condo for her kids to live in, and they of course had roommates that were paying rent to be there. So she was house hacking. It wasn't the house she was living in, but it was a house that her kids were staying in, and it's an asset for her because now the kids have graduated from college and she's still renting it out to college kids. So you know, that's a different way to house hack. And of course, a lot of people think of, like Courtney mentioned, buying a duplex or a triplex or a quad that you can still get with as a single family home, so you can get an easy loan on that, and then renting out the other units. And in fact, you can even go so far as if there's 2 bedrooms in each side, you can rent out the other side and also a bedroom to a roommate. So you can house hack any number of ways. And a lot of my clients, one of the things I advocate for most clients is that they claim a home office. Well, and that's the sense of house hacking, because you're taking some of your expenses from your home and you're deducting it against your business income. And so even though you're not renting out the full amount of the house, you are covering some of the cost of that house and reducing your taxes. So that's a form of house hacking. And that basically runs through what I consider house hacking. Now there's, I guess another way to look at it is you can also think of it as an investment strategy, where not only are you just renting it out, but if you buy a fixer upper and you move into it, live in it a few years, and then you sell it for a tax-free gain, even though that's not technically a house hack, that is a way to make some tax-free money, and you can continue to do that over and over until you get tired of moving every 2 years. But that's one way to make some money.
So Bob, I know we talked about 3 different kind of scenarios. Do you want to jump into those?
Sure.
We can, so we talked about 3 main areas that you can kind of apply a few different strategies to. So the first one is a single family house. The second one is some type of multifamily, let's say a 2 to 4 unit. So a duplex all the way up to a 4plex. And then the last one is a vacation home, second home, like type scenario. So let's kind of break those down. So let's go with the most common one, the multifamily, where it's some type of multi-unit. So let's talk through that, and what are some strategies if someone says, you know what, I want to find a multifamily and I want to house hack it. How can they do that?
Well, they locate the property, they buy it, and that's where they would live in one unit. So if you bought a duplex, you're in one half. If you have a quad, you're in one of the units and you rent out the other three. Obviously, the more units you can rent out, the more rent you can get, and the higher the probability that you're going to cover your complete mortgage, and you can basically live rent free. And that's sort of the idea. I have a client that's got a duplex in the city, and he's doing Airbnb on one side. He did have a tenant, which was for about a year, and the tenant was of course covering about half the mortgage. And then he decided to try Airbnb, and the Airbnb is actually paying for the whole mortgage plus a little extra. So he's got a fairly good location, so that helps. But that's a way to house hack. And the true idea is to generate enough revenue to cover your mortgage, so that you can basically live rent free. And just if you buy a rental just to begin with, you want to have it so that the whole purpose of having a rental is to build wealth over time and have it so that your tenants are making your mortgage payment. Well, if you can structure the house hack so you can do that, you've got the best of both worlds. You got a place to live, and you got someone else paying the mortgage for you. So that's a great way to do it. And it's real easy to do with the fourplexes. And like I said, you can even make it work with a duplex.
I've seen it to where people get some of their mortgage paid through the rent. I've seen some people get all of it paid, and I've even seen some people get paid and then some, like you mentioned with the Airbnb. It's depending on your strategy. And like you mentioned earlier, I've seen some people who had like a duplex, they rent, say they're living in unit A, they rent out unit B, but also in unit A, it's a 3-bedroom and they're a single guy, they rented out the other 2 rooms. So on top of that, they had like maximum level. I've even heard of people going as far as living on the couch and renting out the 3 rooms. That might be a little extreme. So there's a level that, with what do you do with that saved money? Again, this is a way to potentially start saving money so that you can buy another investment property to add to your portfolio. Maybe you're not very interested in adding a whole lot of your to your rental portfolio. Maybe you say, hey, look, maybe let's say your mortgage payment's $1,500 a month. Well, hey, the tenant next door is helping, covers the whole mortgage. Then what you do is you're paying down even more so that you're owning the property quicker, like outright.
Right.
And when you're ready to move out of it, all you've got, now you have a house that's more, maybe it has less of a mortgage or it's owned outright by that point. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I would call this on the multi-unit concept is I've seen people have houses where the house has like an in-law suite, a guest house. For example, so I have a wholesale deal right now available. I just showed it and got soaking wet a little while ago. It's in Slidell. And so what it is, it's a duplex, and then it has 2 camper lots right next to it. So one of the, so it's a 2-bedroom, 1 bath on each side of the duplex. So one of them's getting $650, the other one's getting $795, which market rents between $800 to $900 easily. So both of them you can get there. And then the camper lots, they're $325 a piece. So see how that is. Well, tonight we were looking at, okay, what would the options look like to add more camper lots to the property? That's a potential possibility. And then, so think about that. Like that was just a little bit extra. My father growing up, he bought from his older sibling, he bought the house that he grew up in. Well, my dad was 1 out of 10 kids. So the house that he grew up in was a large split level house, probably 2,500 square feet, because 1 of 10 kids, you need a lot of room. But his dad and them actually, after a certain point, brought a trailer on the property and had two of the older kids living in the trailer at a certain point. Well, so when my dad bought that house, what did he do? He moved into the house, and he's been like, he rented out the trailer. So he had something additional. That can be, I've seen a lot of different ways that you can find the multi-unit concept where you're getting cash flow. So I would use this more as the cash flow concept on the house hacking.
Right.
So that could be the Airbnb, the long-term tenant. Honestly, I like thinking outside the box. What if you lived on a house? What if you lived lived in a house that had a very great access, and it wasn't okay, as a female, I'm gonna say it wasn't tacky for you to put a billboard out in the yard because maybe it was interstate frontage. I'm literally thinking of 2 houses right now that I drive by frequently who have billboards out in their yard. The money from that could help pay. So think outside the box, because everyone gets so upset when they can't find multifamily to do this house hack, especially in today's market. Think outside the box. Understand what the goal is and find ways to accomplish it. Maybe that is, doing those campers on the side. What were you going to say, Bob?
I was going to say the idea is, how do you take a liability, which is the house you live in, and turn it into an asset, which is a cash flowing investment property. And that's what house hacking is. And the ideas you were talking about, putting a billboard on the property, putting some trailers or whatever, if you're in an area that allows that's a great way to bring in cash flow. You could have a tiny house park if you want,
So David brings up a good point. He says, I have a borrower that has 2 roommates, which are friends, paying $450 a month each. It's a 4-bedroom. It has a mortgage payment of $1,200 a month. So that's $900, right? That's $900 of his mortgage that is getting eaten. So he went from it costing him $1,200 a month to $300. And David said he switched from a 30-year to a 15-year. Yeah. If I go in, pay down a lot quicker. He said, how about a mini storage area to rent on the property? So that duplex wholesale deal that I have available, when we were walking earlier, looking at I think it's over an acre, we were looking in the back because there was multiple storage sheds that used to be rentals that needed some work. And we were talking through the option there of turning them into, get a few little small sheds, put a padlock on them and charge $25 extra on rent, or $50 to $100 extra on rent, depending on the size and condition. Those things go a long way, Yeah. I've seen it. I've got a family member who has a piece of land where they allow someone with a heavy piece of machinery, so again, you got to make sure it's allowed in that area, allows them to park some of the heavy piece of machinery, and their business just rents part of their land from them, just storage, right? So getting creative with that. Another thing with the multi-unit concept or cash flow, I've also seen it where I've come across this just in the last 3 years. I think I've come across this 3 different times where you've had a house where it was maybe 2, 3, 4 houses on the same tax bill. Most of the time I've seen it where it's just 2 to 3 houses on the same tax bill. And so you're able to buy into a small little house package. Just earlier this year, I heard about a deal where it had 4 houses on like so many acres. So there's also the level that you could have kind of, I wouldn't call it a compound, but something like that. Again, multi-unit. Bob, anything else you want to say about the multi-family concept?
No, it's just, they're difficult to find good properties out there right now, but it definitely works. From a tax standpoint, let me just say this, from a tax standpoint, it's easier to break out, because if you have a duplex, half the cost of the house goes to the tenant. So it's easier to break that out and allocate the cost. And the IRS allows you to do that because the tenant has exclusive use of the half of the house. When you move into where you're renting out rooms, it gets a little bit different. You don't get to write off as much of the expense to offset that. But the whole goal here is really is not to save on taxes necessarily, as is to get cash flow to cover the mortgage payment.
So if I were, let's say, so I've got this wholesale deal inside of this duplex. Let's say someone wants to house hack it. Would they buy it in an LLC if they're going to live in one of the units?
They could, but the issue, there's a big question on whether if they want to sell it later on and qualify for Section 121, which is the sale of your residence and getting a tax-free amount out of that would be tougher if it's in an LLC. I have heard a person who was another tax person that I'm assuming that she used this strategy and said if it's disregarded LLC that the IRS won't really care. I don't know about that. That's something I have to find. I don't know if there's any cases out there for that specifically, but it will protect you from liability though, in one sense.
So one of the biggest reasons people house hack is because of that borrower friendly.
Right.
And so what is the end goal? Is the end goal to have this to be the, just another property to add, or the first or another property to add into your portfolio? So in which case then, so we've addressed this before. When it comes to FHA financing, which is that good, cheap money, there's a lot of the idea with that is if it's in an LLC, you'll struggle financing wise up front. So you need to look at the strategy as far as liability, but also look at financing and then tax strategies. So the idea of pitting it into an entity or pitting into your own name, keep those three things in mind. There are levels where you can pit it into your name and then quit claim it to an LLC. There are some concepts with that. Any other thoughts that you have, Bob?
So
as far as the cash flow concept?
One of the strategies is a client I mentioned that's doing the Airbnb on one side. We were talking and at first he was saying, yeah, I'm putting all this extra money to pay down my note faster. And I said, and then he got married and the wife of course doesn't want to live in a house with, a duplex, and they were looking at maybe buying another house. And I said, well, since your note payment is being covered by the Airbnb, what you would normally pay for a mortgage or a note, you should be setting aside to build more funds. And that brings up using FHA loans. Once you've lived in a house for over a year, maybe 2 years, you can save up using the extra cash flow from your house hack. You can use the funds as a down payment for the next one and just keep moving into new houses, duplexes, fourplexes, whatever, and living in there and house hacking so that they're covering the mortgage, and you keep building up, the assets and building your portfolio. And one thing that I try to teach everybody is you can figure out how many units you need to have, especially when you get to retirement, but is one way, but that you need to have to cover your actual living expenses. And the goal is to how soon can you get to those units? And then you can use the cash flow from those units to start paying those down faster. And this would be one way to get to that, is to get to a lot of units quickly meaning, it's still a long-term growth strategy, but it's easier to get financing when you're the one buying the house and moving in there, as opposed to being an investor and buying it and not living in the house.
So David said a residence with an accessory unit with border income, border as in like the roommates, like selling, like renting per room.
Tenant income.
Maybe the LLC could take the income and homeowner keep homestead exemption, because that's also a major thing. So you want to real quick explain what homestead exemption is?
Sure. Homestead exemption in Louisiana, it's the first $75,000 of the value of your house is tax exempt from property tax. And so when you move a property into LLC, LLCs can't be homestead exempt. They pay the full taxes. So if you have a personal residence and you move that into an LLC and you still live there, you're going to lose the homestead exemption. When you buy a second home and you move out of the home and you keep the home as a rental, for instance, you're going to lose a homestead exemption on the house where you're not living in. You can have it on the house where you are living. So if you're house hacking, you're going to get a homestead exemption on that house while you're living there. And then, but if you put that in an LLC while you're there, you're going to lose that homestead exemption. So that is a good thing to consider, because that could be depending on where you are in the state, that could be a good amount of money.
So if it's so let's jump into the single family home concept. So let's talk about the cash flow part. If you have a single family home and you're renting out rooms in that home, that's where the homestead exemption, the LLC, those things start becoming blurry versus talk to those things as far as if it's a house. So I know you said it's a lot easier with the duplex because you can just say, hey, this half is the business, this half is personal.
Right. Well, you would, I've talked to people and they said, well, I have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house and I'm renting out 2 of the rooms. So I should be able to deduct 2/3 of my expenses since that's 2/3 of the rooms. Well, it turns out the IRS doesn't allow that. They basically say you have to allocate the expenses for the house, which includes mortgage, interest, property taxes, insurance, all the utilities, whatever, for a deduction against the rental income based on the actual square footage of the house that is exclusively used by the tenants in a ratio to the total house. So if they share a bathroom or the bathroom is accessible to everyone in the house, then that's not considered exclusive use of the tenants. If the bathroom if it's like an ensuite bathroom and they're in that room, I would say that's an exclusive use, so you have more square footage for that. But if it's just a regular 3-bedroom, 2-bath, it's got the master suite, which you happen to be staying in, and then they've got a shared bathroom for the tenants, that shared bathroom doesn't count as square footage rented to the tenants. And neither does the hallway or the kitchen or the living room or anywhere else where you happen to spend time in. So which we don't really have basements here in Louisiana, but if you had a house with a basement and it had a separate entrance and it had a kitchenette and a bathroom down there, you could say that's all exclusive for the tenant, even though there's access from the main residence down to the basement. As long as you don't go down there and that door's pretty much locked, you could say all that square footage in the basement is basically tenant square footage. But when you're in just a regular ranch, 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, or even a 2-story house where the tenants are staying upstairs but they come downstairs, you don't get to write off as much expenses as you do if you had a duplex or a triplex or a quad. So that's, but like I said before, it's really about cash flow and thinking about how am I going to cover the mortgage payment. You're going to save some money on taxes. You're going to, the rental income is going to be taxed because it's going to be rental income, but it's going to be offset by part of the expense of running the house.
So for a single family house, let's start talking into a different way of house hacking, which is a live-in flip, where this, section 121 of the IRS code. This is what I'm currently doing. I bought this place as a fixer-up. I did 90% of the work and then I moved into it. And I still need to, I'm replacing the air vent in the bathroom. I've got a few things that I need to still do. And I'm on the tail end of, I'm wanting to sell it. So I've been in this for a few years now, and now I'm ready to start getting it ready to sell, to then act upon this section 121 of the IRS code. You want to go ahead and explain that?
Sure. Section 121 is where when you sell your residence, your primary residence, you get to exclude the gain from any tax, and that's up to $500,000. So that's married couple filing jointly, $500,000, single individual 250. So so in Courtney's case, she bought the condo, and she's got it a good deal. She's put some money into it, increased its value, and when she sells it, the gain that she's going to receive from selling that will be completely tax free. So one of the investment strategies that I recommend to a lot of investors, it's one of the tax-free investing strategies, is buy a fixer-upper, move into it as soon as you can.
Start the clock.
To
start the clock.
Well, yeah, you know, if you own it for 3 months and then you move in, the IRS isn't going to know the difference between the date you bought it and the date you moved in. Now, if it's almost a tear down and you buy it and it takes you 6 months to get it to where it's habitable, that would be a different story. But most people move into houses that are fixer-uppers, but they're not a really bad, you know, they're not a junker. But that's not saying that you couldn't find a junker, move into it, get it really good, get it at a really good price, fix it up really nice, and then as long as you live in it for 2 years, and then you can live in it. It's living it 2 years of the prior 5 years. So it doesn't have to be consecutive. It just, you could live in it for a year, rent it out for 3 years, move back in for a year, and then sell it. That still counts. Most people tend to live in it for a couple years, move out, maybe rent it for a couple years, and then sell it. And then they still qualify for tax-free gain. The only thing you would pay tax on would be any depreciation that you take on the house. So if you turn it into a rental before you sell it, you're going to, and you depreciate it, which, you know, you should be doing anyway, then you're going to have depreciation recapture, and you're going to pay a little bit of tax on that. And for most people, that's not a big amount of money, so it's not really too bad to consider. But but if you're just moving in, fixing it up, as soon as it's ready to go, and you hit that 2 year mark, and then you put it on the market and sell it, you don't have to worry about depreciation recapture, and you can sell it and, you know, take that gain, invest it in the next house, and pretty soon you can get to the point where you're buying houses for cash to live in, to fix up, and you just keep rolling that cash forward.
So this is a great strategy for people who are good with their hands, who are good, you know, doing some sweat equity. I remember one night I couldn't sleep, so I got up and I changed out the faucet one night in the middle of the night, right? It was like, hey, you know, I needed to do it at some point, so I just got up and I did it. So it's you can do everything from just finding a great deal that's livable. Deals are hard to come by though, but live in it. Or you can find one, like I've seen it everywhere, where people are living in the midst of like a construction site. That's not going to fly with everyone. I get that. I know some people who have lived upstairs and renovated downstairs. I've known people who lived downstairs and renovated upstairs. I think of it like this. What if you found a house that you could get with equity because it had old green shaggy carpet? Actually, I sold a wholesale earlier this year. If it would have been a different location, I think I might have done a live-in flip on this house. It was on an 1.5 acres, which I like land. It had a detached garage. It had a carport. It was a brick house on a slab that was built in the 70s. And inside the house, I'm telling you guys, the green shaggy carpet from the 70s had not been changed since the 70s, okay? It was, the kitchen had the old original Sears appliances in them, okay? I mean, like those might've been antiques at that time, and I probably could have made some money on selling the appliances. The toilets and the tubs were green and pink, ceramic. I mean, there was wallpaper left and right. It was ugly house. This house, the estimated like fixed up value was $175. We got it for like $52.5. Now we ended up wholesaling it because it was right when COVID started. But this one, imagine if you lived in it, fixed up one of the rooms, moved all your stuff in there, or put your stuff in a detached garage, whatever, and room by room start working on it. Maybe, I mean, the kitchen is bearable. It's just ugly. You can still clean it up and live in it. So some people, when you think of house hacking, get outside of just thinking of it one way and know that you can do multiple ways. Imagine if you can put some sweat equity, you know, maybe paint one room one weekend, take down the popcorn ceiling and the wallpaper one weekend and paint it up. And imagine if by the time you were done, you probably had, let's see, let's just say all in, let's just say you're in $55,000 buying it. Let's say by the time you're done fixing it up, you're into it for 80,000. And then you can turn around in 2 years, sell it for 175. That amount of gain being tax free.
Yeah.
Here's the thing is, I know, and this is easily becoming one of the strategies I like, every few years, if the IRS allows you 2 out of the last 5 years for it to be tax free, up to $250,000 for an individual and up to $500,000 for a married couple. I just sat with a friend the other day. He's doing this with high level homes. I'm talking like houses in the sanctuary, half a $1 million houses. And his wife is like, we need to stop. We need to stop. The kids can't keep moving anymore, because what he was doing every 3 or 4 years, he was moving the family. Why? Because he was a contractor and he could get a deal, get it fixed up in a few weeks and move the family in, live there for a few years, and boom. If you're a flipper, if you've ever done a flip and you've paid taxes to the government on that flip, you know why this is advantageous.
Right.
Anything else, Bob, you want to talk about that 121?
No, that's a great strategy. And you can pair it up with a 1031 exchange. We had talked about when Jana was talking the other day. So for instance, if you have a duplex and you sell it and you've been renting the duplex for a while and you finally decide you want to sell the house, the half that you've been living in, you can the gain for that half of the house is tax-free under Section 121. And then you can do a 1031 exchange on the other half of the house. So you can do creative stuff like that. Now for a duplex, it might not be that, the cost of doing the 1031 might be more than the tax on the gain on that. But you can imagine on bigger units that might really work well.
But the point is, some of this may be going over your head. The point is when you go to sell, understand that creates a tax event.
Right.
So whether it's a rental property, you need to be thinking maybe 1031, or if it's a primary, consider if the Section 121 of the IRS might be a good option for you, or they have people who keep them as rentals. The house you live in, you just keep it as a rental. Turn it into a rental and go buy your own house.
Right.
What about the idea of a vacation home? House hacking to get a vacation home?
Well, so here's an interesting thing about vacation homes is that the IRS says that if you use the house for less than 14 days or 15 days, so I guess 14 days or less, you can treat the house as a fully rentable house as long as it's available for rent outside of that. So if you have a house at the beach and you go there, just 2 weeks out of the year, of course, everyone goes, hell, if I have a house at the beach, I'm going to be there every weekend. But, and I have a strategy for that. So, but if you go there and, you're not spending that much time there, you can rent that out. It can be empty most of the time as long as it's available for rent. You have it on VRBO or Airbnb or whatever. You get to write off all the expenses. So you can basically write off your vacation home on your taxes completely because you got it rented out. And
so you said it needs to be less than 14 days where it's not in rental. It has to be because if you went up every weekend, let's just say on a 4-week month, that's only 8 days. But maybe you say, oh, let me throw a day in here.
No, but if you go every weekend, it's like that's 52 days, it's like, literally every weekend. You just want to get away for the weekend, you go up there. Now, here's the thing. So when you're going to your home, especially if it's a rental, I would argue that not all the days you're going are going to be pleasure days. You're going there because you're going to fix up the place, check on the place, and do work on it. If that's the case, that's considered business use. That's not personal use. So basically what you want to do is you want to make sure every time you go there, you have a reason for going that's a business reason, not just hanging out on the beach.
Like meeting with the property management company, or
going there, painting a room,
Yeah.
fixing something, doing, something. And you have a reason that you're there, that you're doing that, and just document it.
So, okay, so having a vacation home and you're doing those things, what if you eventually want to move into that house? Say, hey, that's where I want to retire.
Well, that's easy. Well, you're converting it from what was a rental, you're converting it to just your primary residence. That would be fine. And then you could sell it 2 years later, and you could apply to Section 121 and get a tax-free gain. Now, if you depreciated it, which you would have, had we been, what we were talking about just a minute ago, you would have
taxes on those depreciation.
You'd have recapture depreciation tax. So, but you could do a 1031 on that also. What's really cool is what Janet mentioned the other day is the idea is like, if you have a property, say you have a commercial property that you sell, you can turn around and buy a house at the beach or in the mountains, wherever it is, or some house somewhere that you may eventually want to move into, and then you rent it out for a few years so that you comply with the 1031 exchange, because it's got to be business property for business property, which is our rental property for rental property. Rent it out for a period of time. Janet used two years as an example. And then after that time, you move into it. And then Congress has allowed that if it was a 1031 property and you live in it for 5 years, then you can sell it under Section 121 and get a tax-free gain. You still have the depreciation recapture that you have to deal with, but if you had a commercial property, that could be a big amount of money. But but it's still something you could.
There's a savvy way that you could have potentially
do
something like that, which is why investing being a team sport is having people in your corner. So we're going to get to questions in just a second. But the idea here is that IRS Section 121, let's just call it 121. It is a great concept for, like, I started off with a condo. I bought a condo fixer-upper, moved into it, and now I'm looking to move into a house, a larger house. It's a great way that you can take those gains. I'm almost doubling the money I have into this place as far as the gains that I get. So the thought is build, being able to level up each time with the houses. Like Bob mentioned earlier, at a certain point, you can even just be paying cash for houses. But that's how one way that you can build the lifestyle and the wealth that you'd like, right?
Right.
And that's where, for example, let's just say, start off with a condo, get a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, just on a city lot. And then from there, you then go to, a larger house with some acreage. And then you go from there to a house with some acreage that has an in-law suite, and then somewhere where you can put maybe there's a barn with a barn apartment as well. There's multiple ways you can house hack. It's all going to come down to what your goals are. And understand that as you have different seasons in life, it's going to change. So, right. Bob, anything else you'd like to say before we start answering questions?
No, I think we covered most of the basics of that. I think that was a pretty good discussion. So we can go to some questions, because there's some interesting questions here.
All right. Thou says, hello, Bob and Courtney. Thanks for your time. I'm looking to house hack my single family home. It purchased under a conventional loan. Number one, if you don't want my roommate tenant to know that I'm the owner, how do I structure the contract to identify who is the landlord? And should payments be made to an LLC unless myself as the property manager instead? I know that on the management side, this is where the lifestyle part comes into play. Some people say, okay, I'll rather do live-in flips because I'm not having to deal with the tenant, because then the tenant knows you're next door. Well, what if all of a sudden it's because they know the owner's next door, all they're doing is knocking, right? And this has happened. Oh, my light flickered. You need to come look at this in the electrical. Sometimes people think of it like that. Here's a few things. Number one, you can just train your tenants and say, hey, this is what's appropriate. This is what's not appropriate. This is what this relationship's going to look like, what it's not going to look like. I do know some people who say they kind of make the owner to be some mystical person, this LLC, and they're just the property manager who lives next door. So that's certainly the case. So you said it's a single family home that was purchased under a conventional loan. Bob, if it was purchased under a conventional loan, could payments be made to an LLC?
Well, see, here's the thing. You could set up an LLC that's a management company, and you could also you could make a payment to the LLC too. Y'all both make rent payments. Your payment just happens to come right back to you because it's not going anywhere except it's coming in your account. So, you know, if you want to completely hide that fact, you would have a different an LLC out there. The only problem is if you have to call the property manager who's going to answer, you know, for that. Now, if you actually have a property manager that's managing the property for you, or have someone that they call, you know, that could be another way. I think the easiest thing is just to manage the relationship and just have an agreement, roommate agreement, and you know, basically they're going to have a lease or something that you have them sign, and this is just, you know, and just be upfront with them and don't worry about it.
Then number 2 question is, any tax implications that the house is under my name but renting to roommate under LLC?
No, you're just still going to claim it as income because the LLC would be, well, single member LLC is disregarded, so you would still show it as rental. It doesn't matter if they're making the payments to the LLC.
So it sounds like the conversation needs to be that there's a difference between if an LLC owns the house, or if you own the house, and then if rent's being paid to you or to an LLC.
Right.
Depending on, let's just say there's a scenario where the house is owned by an LLC and they're making payments to the LLC. That's easy. But if the house is owned by you, are they going to make payments to you, or are they going to make payments to an LLC? Why? So that goes back to, while you address the next question, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste. We did a in-depth look on entities. We brought John Stevens and Jared Miguez from Florida League Title, real estate attorneys who work with entities. And Bob did a talk on entities a little while back. I'm going to go copy and paste it off of the video off of YouTube, and I'm going to come paste it here into the chat section, because I think that'll be really helpful for understanding entities. Not only helpful with tax strategies, but they're big on liability. So that's also a big thing, because what if your roommate got hurt and you're the one whose name is on title? So house hacking is great, but entities, LLCs, serve multiple purposes, and part of those purposes is, you know, the liability and then the tax strategy part.
Well, I think one of the issues that so let's go back for, you can set up an LLC for any legal purpose, and a legal purpose is collecting rents. So you could have an LLC that doesn't own the property that collects your rents. And if you're the single member of that LLC, the sole owner, for taxes, the LLC doesn't have to file a tax return. It shows up, that income shows up when your tax return under Schedule E is normal rents. The issue is if you set up the LLC and you transfer the house into the LLC and you're living in the house, LLCs are great for protecting you from liability. One of the issues of that is you got to treat it as a separate business from yourself, and it's separate from you. And so you got to avoid commingling funds and commingling activities and stuff. And I would think that if you put the house in LLC and you happen to live in the house, you wouldn't really have any liability protection from that standpoint. You still have to have, you want to have the right insurance for that. So putting a house that you live in an LLC for liability protection, I don't think would work very well. But if you wanted to keep your roommate from knowing who the owner was, and somehow you could get around the fact that you're the property manager, you're actually acting as the property manager and hiring all the people to come out and do the work. or you work with a realtor or somebody that will do that for you, and you pay them a fee whenever they have to do something, then that would be one way that you could do it. And you could do that through an LLC. That would be a problem.
Okay. Any other questions you guys have? Oh, does that answer your question for you with your scenario? Honestly, I think this is a great way to think about. I'm huge on wanting to build generational wealth. So for example, I have a niece who's 15, so we're starting to think college. Just like Bob mentioned in the beginning, like having a client who is, you know, at LSU, has students at LSU. So my niece, I'm like, okay, let's start talking about where you're thinking about, and I'll go find a good property there and potentially buy one and say, hey, look, okay, you'll either pay rent and just live there like normal and have roommates. And so she can, I know that she's in a good, safe house being, you know, taken care of. Or I can give you a discount on rent and you can help property manage. Hey, you can live there for free, like, because she's my niece, so I'm trying to teach her some things. Or say, hey, you can live here rent free. You just have to be the property manager. There's different ways that you can do it. I've got an aunt who has owned multiple properties near LSU because all of her kids went there, and she's just kept them, just like Bob said with his clients, has kept them throughout the years, long after her kids went to school. Now, because she's waiting for one last one to go through. Now, sometimes they keep them, and then sometimes they sell them.
Right.
Great, I'm glad that answered it for you. But I put that link in there in the chat section for that video Bob shared, and then real estate attorneys who do entity structuring, they answered questions on LLCs and stuff like that. So that was a really good deep dive that you might want to check out if you haven't already. Any other questions, you guys? Because we don't have to stay all the way to 8 p.m. if we don't have any more questions to really tackle. Tell me this, for those of you who are on this and you're already house hacking, can you tell me in the chats what you're currently doing, if you're comfortable with sharing? So you guys got to hear my scenario. I bought a fixer-upper condo. I'm living in here, and I am getting ready to sell it because it's ready, and I'm ready to do that trade up. And I'm looking for another house hack. In the beginning, I wanted multiple units, but those are hard to find, you guys. So got to get creative. Bob, did you do anything creative with yours or no?
With mine, well, actually, the house I'm in now is a house hack in the sense that we bought a fixer-upper, and then we're remodeling and we're living in it and remodeling little bits as we go. The major remodel, of course, is going to be the kitchen. We're going to do a major remodel in the master bath. We just finished doing the hall bath, but one of the problems that for me with this is it's not a problem. It's like I just like the neighborhood. I
grew up in that neighborhood. It's a good established neighborhood. If you had a family, this is a way that you can get into one in a savvy way.
Yeah.
But hey, living in the middle of a construction site is not for everyone. So some people get them and do all the renovation on, you know, the front end and then live in it fixed up for the timeline. Yeah. Some people do it while they're there.
Yeah. Well, after Katrina, you know, we were living in a house that got 1.5 feet of water. And so after we had gutted the place and cleaned it out, we ended up having to move into it. That was around November, right before Thanksgiving. And so we were living with, it had one bathroom. You know, it still had studs. We could see all the way through the house. We had a crock pot, and I think we finally went and bought a stove and plugged it in. But, you know, we literally lived in, it was like camping for months as we rebuilt that thing. But it was a construction site because the guys that come, the sheetrockers came in, and it was all dusty and everything. So, yeah, I don't want to really live in a construction site, but you know, if you do it bits at a time, you can manage that pretty well. It's just if you buy a really junked up house, if I did that, I would definitely have a team come in, fix it up before I moved in. I'd be ready to do that.
Have you seen anyone house hack with new construction?
Yeah, actually, I have a client who did that. He was, after Katrina, he was buying lots in Lakeview when they were going really cheap because no one wanted to be there. They were afraid of the flood insurance, everything. He was building these really nice homes, and he was selling them for, you know, $500,000 to $1 million. And then I told him, I said, why don't you move into one and do it? So he did 2 houses that way. He flipped 2 houses and fixed it up because he was the contractor. He could get the rates, you know, he didn't have a markup that he had to put for the contractor markup, and he had the whole team and everything. And so he did his house while he was doing other clients, and worked out pretty well for him.
So I've got family members who just finished building who easily have 6 figures worth of equity, potentially multiple 6-figure into this house because they self-managed it and, you know, got it built. And the way they were able to do it, they added a lot of value, had a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul, my business partner, who I was wanting him to chime in, said, Charlene and I bought a duplex in 1992, lots of sweat equity, and bartered with other traders to keep construction costs low. They lived in one side and rented the other side, stayed there for a while, and then moved to another home we purchased with instant equity. So hopefully that's a great story. Actually, I hear him tell it all the time. But I mean, look at this too. Paul has 4 kids, 2 of them that are getting married, that they have been teaching. Again, that's that generational wealth, passing this on. So his kids, who are probably going to come back and watch this video, have been learning about what that looks like to house hack. His one son's 21 and has 2 properties already. And so there's ways that you can, you know, not only demonstrate, but make it a family event, you know. Anything else, Bob? Any other questions, you guys? I want to make sure that we cover everything. Thank you for sharing, Paul.
So I have, well, my daughter lives out in Denver, and she just graduated from graduate school, and she's working now, and we've been talking about that. And I told her, I said, you should house hack. And of course, this was a few months ago, and she goes, what's that? And so I explained it to her, sent her a little link from Bigger Pockets that explained some of the stuff, because the houses in Denver are fairly expensive. Mm-hmm. But if you move in, you got some roommates that can help you pay the mortgage. That would be a great way to get into a house. And then she actually went to a Zoom meeting the other day for the first REIA meeting. So I've got her on the track of looking at real estate and everything. So that's exciting.
That's awesome, Bob, because that's the idea of bringing it home, right? Because we're talking about the place where you live. Now, I don't have a family yet, so the dogs, like when I think about moving, it's the dog and the stuff, right? So people who talk about moving every, 3-4 years, think about it if you had kids, right? Like a wife and kids, had to pack them up and move. So I get that it seems like a lot. Now, when you think about, $75,000 tax-free, I'll come pack them up for you. Like, it becomes worth it after a while. But think about what you could be teaching the kids and making a little bit of a family business with it,
Right.
Hey, so what do we want as a family? Maybe we want to eventually, live in Florida on the beach. Okay, so let's house hack, let's start here. Let's get it to where we're now living in a certain, a house that's worth X amount. Well, there's no way that I feel like I could afford a house like that. And Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is a book that many of you guys have read, it changes that mindset shifts to not, oh, I can't afford that too. How can I afford it? And this is one of those ways to where, what is your dream lifestyle? What is your dream house? What is your dream goal? I don't know if you guys can see it, but I've got back there on that fridge, I have some vision boards. I have one for business and one personal. And I've got a mountain house and I have a beach house on there. Because my family goes to 2 places very frequently. We go to Gatlinburg and we go to Destin. I'm sure many of you guys do too. So what I'd love to do is like to have an asset out there, because I'd like to stop having to pay someone for their Airbnb. I'd like to own the Airbnb. So
right.
So it all comes down to what those end goals are for you. Some people, it makes sense to have the roommates. It makes sense to have the tenants. Some people, the live and flip accomplishes the goal just as well. All right, so that's a good question. Should I consider, so in the scenario where you have a single family home and you're renting out the rooms, should I consider getting landlord insurance or require tenant to get renter's insurance? So that's starting to get complex there, because that goes back to the question of liability, which is the whole point, one of the whole biggest points with insurance. That is a question that, Bob, what are your thoughts on that?
So you should have you should definitely have a discussion with your real estate agent to make sure, I'm sorry, your insurance agent, to make sure that you have the proper coverage if you're renting out rooms inside your residence. Now, I think for the fact that the key thing there is that it's your residence, you're living there, so homeowners insurance would cover that. And you know, you could have someone there. If you don't live in the house, then you have to get a dwelling policy, which is basically landlord insurance. As far as the tenant to get renter's insurance, that might be a good thing for them to do.
Usually just covers their contents.
Because it just covers the contents that they have. So
talk with your insurance person on this, because here's the thing is, you don't want to get the wrong insurance and something happened to the house, and then all of a sudden the house is no longer insured properly.
Right.
Because here's the thing is, you want to be savvy, but you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot with any of this.
Right. And remember, insurance companies are good at two things: collecting premiums and denying claims. So you got to make sure you have the right coverage, and you got to ask questions. And insurance agents are really bad at trying to save you money by cutting policies down, or saying, oh, you can opt in for this exclusion or whatever, and it'll save you this, you'll get a discount for that. And next thing you know, you have a policy that doesn't cover you for anything. So be very careful for that. And the other thing you want to make sure with insurance is make sure you have replacement coverage. Because if the house burns down, you don't have replacement coverage, you have land basically with a smoking hulk on it, and you still owe a mortgage on it. So
get with your insurance person. I would ask them, do you have any clients who are living in their house and have roommates? And kind of just ask them if they have clients already like that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or have had experience with clients like that, and see is this brand new for them, or are they really experienced with this? Things along those lines.
Yep.
All right, you guys. Hey, it's been a great night. Unless you have any further questions, I appreciate you guys joining us on a Thursday night. It's been a fun topic. This is a topic that I think a lot of people say, hey, is this my way to get my foot into, real estate? There's a lot of different ways that you could do it. When it comes to look, here's one we barely even talked about, is the house that you live in, keep it and turn it into a rental and add it to your rental portfolio. So sure, it depends on how you do it. You might eventually not get the 121 out of the IRS, but you have a property added into your portfolio, and it's been being paid down, or maybe you own it outright at that point.
Right.
Here's the thing is, we talk about all these different strategies and all these savvy ways to be, these tax strategies, or these savvy ways to get properties, or all these things, but understand that you won't always have grand slams. Those come very few and far between. But here's the thing is, the goal, figure out what the goal is, and how can you make imperfect but continual progress toward it.
Right.
So if it's to have a portfolio of properties, what does that look like? So, and maybe that is, having money to where you can buy 3 houses, sell one of them, and keep the other 2 with minimal mortgages. What do those little hacks look like across the board? But know that you can do it with the house that you live in.
Yep.
So thank you guys so much for tuning in tonight. Bob, thank you for sharing with me tonight on this topic. As usual, if you guys want to tune in, July 7th, we're having another webinar. And July 14th, mark your calendars. We're meeting in person. Wear your mask if you'd like to. On July 14th in Covington, Louisiana at the Weekstay Suites. Wherever you find out about this event, you can go there and find out about that event. It'll be recorded. I may not do it live. I'm not sure yet. But I'll record it. And looking forward to seeing you guys either at the next one, the next webinar, or the next in-person meeting. And hope you guys have a great night. Enjoy the rest of your week and have a safe 4th of July, whatever that looks for us in this COVID era, right? All right, you guys have a great night. Talk to y'all soon.
Bye-bye.